Let's testify tonight. Oh God, you've done so much for me. I'm grateful and overwhelmed here at your feet. And I could stay here forever, Lord. But you call me to something more. And I hear you say that you have a plan to use every broken woman and man to display just how good you are. We are your living pieces of art. What good does it do to hide away when all of my scars are a picture of grace? All right. So I will testify of the power of God. I will tell the word of the hope I have found. For my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Oh, do you believe it? Has he done it for anyone else? I said, has he done it for anyone else? Cause the God that I serve, he's always at work. Has he done it for anyone else? So come on and testify of the power of God. Come on and tell the world of the hope we have found. For our body was broken, our hearts were made whole, and that's too good to keep to yourself. Come on and testify of the power of God. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. I'm gonna testify. Somebody testify your voice. This is my. So I'm gonna testify. Somebody testify. Come on, take it up. Jesus, my champion, the victor of grace, the only one worthy of all of my praise. Yeah. So come on and testify. Oh, somebody lift him high. Come on, testify the power of God. I will tell the world of the hope I have found. Oh, for my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Sing that. Oh, my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Oh, let's do that right now, Murfreesboro.
I thought I set it to. Oh, that was on the Sunday stream. I keep forgetting. Okay, never mind. I was waiting for it to automatically switch over. Obviously, it didn't, and I forgot that I have a different room set up in my streaming software for the Sunday stream versus the weekday stream, because so I can keep track of which chapter we're on in the weekday stream. But on the Sunday morning, I made it so that at the end of the song, it would automatically switch over to the camera shot that you're looking at now. And I was sitting there waiting for it to switch, and it didn't switch, so the song started over real quick. But then I realized my mistake. So good to see you guys tonight. I am, gosh, getting nervous about the upcoming school year because, man, I have not been in school since before some of you were probably born. So it's kind of scary. But yeah, I'm also really really looking forward to going back to school. So I will definitely keep you guys informed on how that adventure is going as I partake in it. But in the meantime, we are. Oh, what was I was going to say something about what happened today that now it's slipping my mind. Old man jitters. What can I say? But Josiah here, active in the chat as always. Gorilla is also here. And good to see you both. And anybody lurking in the chat, or not lurking in the chat, but lurking on the stream, or anybody that joins us later, welcome. You do not have to participate in the chat. However, I try to read all of the chat. I do not ignore chats, at least unless they're from one particular person that I shall not name. Anyway, you were out of school before my parents were born. Possibly. I might go to college myself in the summer of 2026. Awesome. Yeah, like I said, I'm gonna hopefully start in the upcoming spring term. I don't want to try to get in the winter term because I'm gonna need a little bit of prep time. And I've talked to a couple of college professors over at real professors. I'm not talking about teachers; these are actual PhD professors, and actually senior members of their various departments. About what the best direction to go for major and minor would be and stuff. So now that I got that worked out, I need to talk to the admissions people as far as where I need to be academically to begin the program. I'll probably take a couple of courses ad hoc at the local junior college just to get the math and or English skills that I need for entrance into the program that I'm going to be doing. Stan is in the house. Says, "Hey, almost missed it. So you're going for an actual degree? I'm gonna. Boy, am I. Let me tell you. So I don't know if it's fair to announce it just yet, but yes, by the time all is said and done, it's going to take a while. But by the time all is said and done, I will have more than one. But it's yeah, it's going to be an intense few years. I'll just say that. Because can't you just audit any college class for free? Yes, you can. Generally, most colleges, depends. Some private schools won't let you audit for free. But I think pretty much all public colleges will. However, if you audit a course, you do not get college credit for it. And depending on the course, like in some cases, like for example, if you're going for a degree in something where the mathematics requirements are at the very high end of it, then if you take algebra 1 at a community college, it doesn't matter if you audit it or not because algebra 1 is not going to count towards like a mathematics degree because you're going to be, it's the mathematics degrees like start at like, pre-calculus, so yeah. Yeah, if you want the lectures but not the credits. Yeah, that would be a good thing to do if you're just auditing. I am not planning on just auditing. I have very specific intentions with my degree. And the nice thing is that thanks to my daughter, the cost of said college is because the one thing that stopped me from going back to school before has always been the expense because as most of you know, college is an extremely expensive endeavor, and many people come out of school with tens if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, and then they now to try to find a job, right? And obviously, by the time I graduate, I'm not going to have that long of a working life ahead of me, so I wouldn't be able to come close to paying off that debt. And then when I died, the kids would be left with the debt and the house, and so they wouldn't be able to keep the house because the debt would have to be paid. So I will not go into debt to go to school. However, fortunately, thanks to a very wonderful program that my daughter found, that I will not have to pay at all. So that's very, very good. So no additional debt for school. I'm very excited about that. Streep says, Dr. Salty, indeed. By the time I finish, that will be my official title. Ready for Christmas? I'll be honest with you. This year, Christmas is going to involve putting up any Christmas decorations we have from last year, and that's it. No gifts, no nothing, because we just don't have it in the budget. We barely squeaked out enough to get the Thanksgiving dinner, and that's honestly only because we had a couple of turkeys in the freezer from last year when they did an insane sale, and so we bought a couple of turkeys that we've kept in the freezer ever since. So, if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't be having a Thanksgiving dinner. But yeah. You could teach and be Professor Salty. That is also true. Although my ultimate goal is not to teach. If an opportunity to teach came up, I would seriously consider taking it. But that's not what my ultimate goal is. I'll talk about that in the years to come. But right now, I'm not ready to really talk about what my long term goals are with all this. But short term, I need to get started. I hope you don't get bullied. I will tell you, you know what? Honestly, talking to the professors that I've talked to, I'm actually more concerned of almost the opposite. Because professors from a couple of different departments have told me, that because of my age, that I could expect other students to be looking to me for leadership. Because they don't have a lot of older students, and generally, when they do, the older students, because in addition to whatever they're learning in classroom, we tend to have life experience that a 18 to 20-year-old does not have. So, so they would be looking to me for like, oh, what do we do? So yeah. Wondering, is dry sherry cooking wine and Cajun mix would be a good injector for a turkey? I have no idea. I've never tried. The only thing I've ever injected turkey with is, like a butter based, and I think that's really good. But yeah, I don't know about putting. I'm not the biggest sherry and wine fan, so particularly dry varieties. However, if you enjoy that kind of flavor, I would say go for it. And then Stan saying swirly, hazing, frat. It's funny you mentioned that. I was actually thinking, should I actually consider joining a fraternity? But I probably will not. There are several represented at MTSU, but I doubt that I would join one. And if I did, obviously I wouldn't live there because I have a house here. But on the one hand, you know, because I know a lot of people when they think of fraternities and fraternities, that they are just, or not fraternity, fraternities and sororities. They tend to think of just like they're just big party houses. And it is true that frat parties can be very, very intense. I've picked up and delivered people to and from them doing the Uber thing multiple times. However, the core purpose of them is to have a support group, usually in the same general field of study, like you would have a frat that was all science majors, or a frat that was all sports majors, or whatever. And the the idea would be that you have basically a bunch of people that you can study with and learn with to strengthen each other through the educational process. And that part of it, I would be very, very interested in. The only problem is, yeah, but I would definitely not be a big part of the party scene, you know. So let me see what is going on here. Make sure it's up. Oh, okay, that was just Thanksgiving business. All right. So yeah, so I don't know if I'll be joining anything like that. I may if I can do it without having to live on campus because I have no intention of living on campus, especially when my house is only 15 minutes away. So and Stan says zero point 0.0. Not sure what you mean there. And then Josiah says quack. Gorilla says the only reason I have cooking wine is for the Chinese fried chicken wings. Fair enough. Multi Gunman is in the house, says, how's it going? Not too bad, Multi Gunman. You'll be happy to know that Alex Bogey has not shown up in a couple of weeks. I think he's kind of given up on me finally, now that he realizes there's no way he's going to convert me to the Orthodox Church because I don't believe in blasphemy. Go to the parties and do a keg stand. That would definitely not happen. Play some beer pong. Also, ain't gonna happen. Even if I went to the parties, I would probably not drink at all because yeah, I don't need that kind of headache. Let's see. I'm come out with this. Let's see. I've come out with this. I've being a feminine man on YouTube. He is beautiful and he is cute. I think he needs a girlfriend and talk to my priest. I have no idea what you're talking about there, Josiah. So you know somebody who's a feminine man on YouTube who is beautiful and cute and needs a girlfriend. And why talk to your priest? I don't know. Yeah, Chinese cooking wine's like specific thing. It really is not good for drinking. Yeah. Salty's going to drink the entire fraternity under the table. Probably not. I have not done any serious drinking since I was young enough to be in a fraternity. So, I drink occasionally, and I'm very picky about what I drink. So, there's only a couple of wines that I'll drink and whiskey, and that's mostly it, other than the occasional mixed drink. I'm not drinking it. I got plenty of vodka. I'm thinking of using it on the turkey. Right. And Street Preacher says, sorry, having some lustful thoughts to Josiah. About the feminine dude? I don't know. And Robert says, Shalom tonight, Michael J. Crawford. Shalom, shalom, Robert. Hope you are well. Josiah, yeah, I guess so. And Multi Gunman says, no, Alex Bogey, that's good. No trolling from him tonight. LOL, yeah. Although, boy, did we get our fair share from Darren on Sunday. Man, that was a rough one. And my apologies to anybody who was turned off by the whole thing with Darren on Sunday, but I'm tired of backing down from him, so I'm actually going to do a video saying with no uncertain terms my feelings on that. I made sure to pack my winter survival kit in the car, a bottle of Jack, because if I'm going to freeze to death, might as well be comfortable. There you go. Trustin in the house says good evening. Let's see. Street Preacher says, just give the undercarriage a little how's your father. Wow. Little Austin Powers there. At that point, it's medicinal. And then who's serving the Romulan ale tonight? Ooh, Romulan ale. You know, it's funny. I actually made a Romulan ale drink once using blue cacao, I think is how you say it, mixed with a couple other things, and it was good. I might have to try that again sometime. I was talking to the feminine man, telling him he has beautiful eyes and he's cute, and I think I need a girlfriend and need to talk to my priest. Okay, that makes more sense. Well, then, yes, I would say talk to your priest for sure. Not necessarily that you need a girlfriend, but that you need to control your thoughts. Honestly, Unfortunately, and before I get into the reading, I'll say this: a lot of people, and I've known people that have done this. They come to Christ, and then they think, okay, now I need a girlfriend or boyfriend, and they get mad if God doesn't immediately provide them with a girlfriend or boyfriend. If that's the case, what's wrong is not that God didn't provide you with the companionship that you crave. It's that you're craving companionship above your relationship with God. And so, as Christ Himself said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God." And if God has a girl lined up for you, she will come eventually. And don't stress over it, because the more you stress over it, the more it becomes a priority ahead of God, which is kind of funny considering the reading we're about to get into. So, speaking of which, let's get into Leviticus chapter 19. Now, chapter 18 was, of course, the oh so fun, all sorts of sexual regulations. 19 is more or less a list of general laws, because we've had nothing but very specific sections of law, like the bodily discharges and rashes, and then the sexual conduct. Now we're going to get into a general legal thing. And this is the one thing that's kind of interesting is, as it starts out, you're going to notice some striking similarities to the Ten Commandments. And some people kind of confuse this with the Ten Commandments. So, one of the things that atheists will sometimes say is, what are the actual Ten Commandments? Are they, and they'll list the ones that we read from Exodus, and then they'll say, or are they, and they'll read the list we're about to list. And they forget that this is not the Ten Commandments. This is not the event where Moses was given the stone tablets and all that. This is completely separate. This is after the tabernacle has been built. And so, where the stone tablets were prior to the building of the tabernacle. So, this is God giving a more detailed description of the law besides just the 10 core principal commandments. All right. Just want to make sure that that is clear and understood. So let's get right into it. Leviticus chapter 19, starting at verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the entire assembly of Israel and say to them, Be holy, because I, the Lord your God, am holy." Now, one thing that I want to make sure that is clear: the word "holy," which is said here twice, and in Scripture is said a lot, and as far and so, is sometimes there's like one passage where it's mistranslated to be saying being perfect, because I am perfect. But that's not what holy means. Holy, it means to be set apart. That's and so it means that, for example, in fact, it's a really good example. It's one thing that people tend to think like sex is dirty to Christians. No, sex is holy to Christians. It's to be set apart. It's to be something that is special and only for certain circumstances. It is not dirty, nasty, bad. It's wonderful. It's godly. It is one of the greatest gifts that God has bestowed upon man. But it's to be kept separate from like your everyday life, right? And unfortunately, in modern America, we've cheapened sex to where it's just something you do, and so it's no longer holy. It's no longer set apart from the rest of your life. Each of you must respect your mother and father, and you must observe my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Do not turn to idols or make metal gods for yourselves. I am the Lord your God. When he says "I am the Lord your God," he's now he doesn't say it after everything, but he's just basically reiterating every now and then. If you're going to ask me why, there's your answer, because I am God. So I know that some people think that's not a satisfactory answer, but the truth is that if God is in fact God. If God created the universe, then I think it's fair to say that he can make the rules of this universe whatever the heck he wants to. So, his reminder that he is God is to remind us that, he is the ultimate authority. When you sacrifice a fellowship offering to the Lord, sacrifice it in such a way that it will be accepted on your behalf. It shall be eaten on the day you sacrifice it, or on the next day. Anything left over until the third day must be burned up. Now, of course, we covered that in the sacrificial section at the beginning of Leviticus. If any of it is eaten on the third day, it is impure, will not be accepted. Whoever eats it will be held responsible because they have desecrated what is holy, set apart to the Lord. They must be cut off from their people. So take the sacrificial system seriously. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field. Rather, the gleanings of your or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Now, gleaning is a term we don't generally use in modern vernacular, but the idea here is that if, let's say, you have a wheat field and it's 1 acre square, and so when it's time to harvest the wheat field, number one, you make one pass, right? And so your workers go up and down the field one time. Gleaning is to go back and get whatever you may have missed, and to go all the way to the edge of the field. So it's saying don't go to the edge of the field, because that is for the poor to come and be able to get food. It is perfectly legal in Israel for people who don't have food and don't have money for food to go to a farmer's field and glean from the edges of his field whatever may be there. And after harvest, they can go through the whole field and get whatever is available. So it's something that's very important. It's kind of funny because God has a welfare system already in place, and even though most Christians say, "Well, God says pick yourself up by your bootstraps, and you should just you know what? Everybody is supposed to. If you have means, then part of your means is supposed to go to the poor. But we forget that part. Do not over. Let's see. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. I am the Lord your God. So once again, it's the same. So it's true of all of your agricultural needs except for livestock. Do not steal. Do not lie. Do not deceive one another. Well, those are pretty straightforward. Do not swear falsely by my name, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. This is the one that in the Ten Commandments is generally listed as do not take the Lord's name in vain. A lot of people misunderstood what that means. So there are a lot of Christians today that say, for example, let's suppose that you see a huge car accident happen right in front of you, and you go, "Oh my God!" Right? And there are some Christians who will say, "Oh, you are a blasphemer. You have taken the Lord's name." That's not taking the Lord's name in vain. It may not be completely appropriate to say that, but it is not taking the Lord's name in vain. What is taking the Lord's name in vain is to say, "I swear by God that this is the truth," when it's not. Or to use, as politicians today tend to do, to try to use your religious beliefs as a reason for a political stance that has nothing to do with it. God is not supposed to be a bullet point, right? God is supposed to be the centerpiece of your life. Do not defraud or rob your neighbor. Do not hold back the wages of a hired worker overnight. Now, this is an interesting one because today, this is done universally pretty much. If you work for anyone, generally speaking, you do not get paid usually for a couple of weeks. And so that is actually, if you're Jewish, a violation of the law. And as a Christian, while we're not bound by the law, the idea here is that if you do, as an individual, if you hire somebody to do work, you pay them immediately. You do not wait. And that should be a principle that we live by. The funny thing is that there's only one place I've ever worked that has lived up to this commandment. And even though I don't have a lot of respect for the company other than that, and that company is Uber. When I drive somebody from point A to point B, I get paid about 30 seconds after I drop off the customer. And that money is in my bank account ready to be spent. So it's, that's kind of an interesting perspective on things. Do not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block in front of the blind, but fear your God. I am the Lord. Now, this one is another interesting one because a lot of people think that this is literally just talking about disabled people. And a lot of rabbis have written about this, so I'm going based on some of their writings, plus I think what is a common sense interpretation of this particular scripture. Yes, it kind of does mean that you should, when they say don't curse the deaf or put a stumbling block in front of the blind, what they're talking about, what God is talking about here, is what does it mean to curse the deaf? It's to say something that you know the other person cannot hear, right? So it would be as like if somebody pisses you off and you literally throw a curse at them, even though they're nowhere around, so they can't hear. Shouldn't do that. A stumbling block in front of the blind could be anything. And in fact, it could be something like, for example, a person who is ignorant of what God's word says, and like, let's say, on the subject of sexual immorality. And you have these progressive Christian churches that go out there and teach point blank that it is not only okay to have these various feelings that are contrary to what the Bible says, but that it is okay and they should be encouraged to go and practice said things. Um, and uh, and and some go as far as to suggest that God Himself is queer in one way or another. This is putting a stumbling block in front of people that may be completely ignorant that what you're doing is causing them to fall. So, so you need to be very, very careful about knowingly. And thank you, ABJ puts out the curse doesn't necessarily mean words; it can mean to call down harm upon them. But generally speaking, cursing is to basically wish for harm to become them. And so it's one thing if you are upset because somebody cuts you off in traffic. It's another if you actually wish for bad things to happen to that person. Which, don't get me wrong, I know we're all guilty of that, right? There are times when, like somebody is driving like a maniac, weaving through traffic and cuts you off along the way, and you're like, well, I just hope they get into a big old wreck. You shouldn't do that. All right, moving on. Do not pervert justice. Do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly. This is one that, boy, does our society not get right. So, the perversion of justice is to basically give partiality to anyone. Notice it points out you should not give partiality to the poor just because they're poor, and you should not give partiality to the rich just because they're rich. Instead, you should look at the facts of a particular case and judge fairly. And so, if you are to have any kind of position where you are to judge between right and wrong, you should never let your personal bias about that person get in the way. Because it's really easy for some people, like they see, for example, a homeless person who's all disheveled and nasty, and they immediately think that that person is lazy or whatever. Or some people immediately think, oh, that person has been crapped upon by society. You don't know unless you know the facts of the case. Likewise, you might see someone who is driving a brand new Mercedes wearing a $5,000 Armani suit and simply assume that either they've worked hard to earn all that money, or you might assume that they're an evil, corrupt person who got it by stepping on the backs of the poor, where you do not know. And so you should not judge a person on superficial things at all. You should only judge based on the facts that are presented. Do not go about spreading slander among your people. That's another one we do a lot of. And so we got to be very, very careful. There's one thing to, and slander is an interesting one. Let me take a look at what word is used. This is, let's see, verse 16 we're on. So let's turn that on and go back to verse 16. So, yeah, so notice it's the word rakil, it literally means slander or gossip. I just wanted to make sure that it didn't have a different meaning that I didn't know about. But let's take a quick look at something. Now, listen carefully. The definition of slander: slander is the act of making false, damaging statements about someone orally which harms their reputation. It's a form of defamation, distinct from libel, which of course is written. So, a very, very important component of slander is that it is something that is untrue. So, I will give you an example from my own life. When Queen Elizabeth died, I said, somebody asked me on one of my live streams how I felt about the death of Queen Elizabeth. And I gave my honest answer, which is that, not being a British subject in any way, I don't live in a British colony, nor do I, or am I a citizen of Great Britain at all. And not being a person that has any real vested interest in the Queen, not to mention the fact that the Queen was the single most privileged person on Earth. I felt nothing. I didn't feel. It's not that it was nothing like good or bad about it. I was kind of indifferent because it's not like it was a tragedy. She lived to a ripe old age and she was extremely comfortable most of her life, and in fact, more comfortable than pretty much anybody else. She could literally have anything she wanted. The and so she had a great life and she died, but I knew nothing about her, so I didn't feel good or bad about it. Right now, if you were to say, "Well, the Queen died and Michael J. Crawford didn't really care," that would be a true statement. However, someone was going around telling people when she died that I said that I was glad that the B word is dead. I don't. I'm not saying who it was. I do know who it was, but that's not the point here. But the fact that is exactly the kind of thing that verse 16 is talking about. Is that if that person had said, well, he didn't really care about the fact she died, that would not be a big deal. But to sit there and exaggerate what I said for the express purpose of damaging my reputation, which it did, by the way. There were several people who were subscribed to my channel that talked to me on a very regular basis. They were from the UK. Immediately stopped talking to me because they believed this person, and they didn't believe me when I tried to say that's not what I said. Even though pretty much anybody that knows me knows I would never say something like that. But whatever. So that is the kind of slander it's talking about. It's to try to harm somebody's reputation. which is an absolute. It's one thing if you're calling out something like if you see hypocrisy in a public figure and you call it out, that's fine as long as it's truthful. It's not okay if you are knowingly telling untruths. Do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. I am the Lord. Do not hesitate, or do not hate a fellow Israelite in your heart. Rebuke your neighbor frankly, so that you will not share in their guilt. So notice what it says here. Hate is not okay, right? Now, that hate is different from anger. Remember, anger is an emotional reaction to what you perceive as an injustice. That's all anger is. It might be an injustice against yourself. Most of the time when we get angry, that's what it is. Like somebody cuts you off and you're angry because you had someone commit an injustice, driving recklessly and almost getting you in an accident against you. As opposed to hate. Hate is the hanging on to that anger and turning it into an attitude towards that person. And so it's one thing if the person cuts me off in traffic and I'm angry for a second and then I let it go. It's another thing if it's someone and I catch their license plate number and then every time I see that license plate I'm plotting against them or something. Now it's turning into hate. So we need to be very careful about that. But notice the very next thing. Rebuke your neighbor frankly so that you will not share in their guilt. If somebody particularly a fellow believer, does something that is sinful in some way, then it is your duty, particularly as a Jew, but as even in the Christian text, which we'll get to eventually, it repeats this. It is your absolute duty to confront that person, not in a hateful way, but in a way with love, in that you showed your genuine concern. Hey, you know what? I noticed that you did X, and as my understanding is that doing X is wrong because here's what it says in the Bible, blah 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 blah, and then you basically are showing them what you believe they did wrong. And the reason for that is that if you do not do that, if you stay quiet about it, then as this line says, you share in their guilt. So if somebody commits a sin, a believer, remember, this does not apply to, and that's why I notice it says, in this case, it says fellow Israelite. In the New Testament, it does talk about this is applying only to fellow Christians. If somebody does something wrong and you do not say anything, then you are basically giving them tacit permission to do so. You are encouraging it by not discouraging it. And so you are every bit as guilty as they are. So if you have a friend that you know is, say, sleeping around with a bunch of people and you don't say anything about it, then you're just as guilty as they are. So that's something to be very, very careful of. As a Christian, you are held to a higher level of responsibility. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. A lot of people don't realize that that is in the Old Testament first. I am the Lord. So again, if somebody wrongs you, and this is something that a lot of, especially Christians in America, do not get. You do not seek revenge, right? Under any circumstances. As painful as that may be to admit, we have a tendency to do it. If somebody punches you in the face, your first reaction, assuming you're not, a 98-pound weakling, is to punch them in the face, right? To get them back. If somebody cuts you off in traffic, I've seen people do this where the first thing they want to do is speed up and cut them off, right? Revenge is not a good idea. That's why in other parts of the Bible it says, revenge is God's. It's not for us. That being said, there are consequences for sin. If they break a law and they are brought before the judge, then you testify truthfully about what happened, and that is not taking revenge. That is doing your civic duty in the court. And if that person is convicted and punished, That's not revenge, that's the judicial system. And so we need to be very careful and understand what revenge is: you personally taking it upon yourself to get the other person back for something they did to you, regardless of whether or not that is justified. Because God will take care of it in the end, and we need to trust God in this. Anyway, keep my decrees. Well, that's a pretty obvious one, you would think, but it's one that sometimes requires a little reminding. It is a law of God that you follow his laws, right? Now, of course, as a Christian, if you're a non Jewish Christian, the laws do not necessarily apply. But as Paul says, the law is there to show us, to guide us, and to show us our sin. So just because we don't have to worry about the punishment of the law, it doesn't mean that we should not attempt to follow the law, at least the laws that have to do with morality primarily. Laws about like food laws and stuff, Christ specifically said do not count. Do not mate different kinds of animals. That may sound silly, but think about it. If you have two different species of animals, say you're trying to make a cat dog, right? By making a dog and cat get together, first of all, you're harming those animals by doing that to them. And second of, because they're not designed to go together. And second of all, it ain't going to work anyway, as anybody with even a high school level of biology understands. Different species cannot produce fertile offspring. Do not plant your field with two kinds of seed. Now, this one sounds a little strange, I know, but it is one from an agricultural sense that makes a lot of sense. It's not saying, and this is where a lot of people get confused, that if you have a field that you can't have different types of crops in it. It's saying you don't mix those crops at the same time. So you don't plant grapes and wheat at the same time in the same field. Now, why not? Well, there's a plethora of reasons. One of which is that if you plant those two crops together, then neither of them are going to be particularly healthy because they're robbing resources from the other. But even if they don't, harvesting your grapes and your wheat in the same field would be nearly impossible. And so it just doesn't make a lot of sense. So instead, you would, if, for example, there's a field right across the road from where we live, and these people would commonly plant cotton in that field. And then after the cotton is harvested, they would clean up the field and then plant corn in that field. And rotating the crops actually helps the health of the soil. But as opposed to planting the same thing over and over and over, drains the soil of certain nutrients and eventually makes it so that it's difficult to grow anything. But rotating the crops can actually help. And sometimes what you'll do is you'll actually plant certain things that you don't even harvest. Really, you just cut them down so that they die and let them decompose into the soil to help revitalize the soil. But you don't plant cotton and corn at the same time. Do not wear clothing woven of two kinds of material. This is another one that some people get confused. And some people, first of all, obviously, this is not a moral thing. This is actually one of the laws that's designed for practicality and the survivability of Israel. Why, you may ask? Well, it's actually fairly simple. If you have two different types of material, and keep in mind, we're not talking about today with modern synthetics and stuff like that, and modern sewing practices that we have. If you're back then and you have two different types of material that you're sewing together, like say wool and oh gosh, I'm forgetting the other one that I was thinking of. But wool is obviously one of the most common that you get from your sheep. And oh, I don't know, we'll just say leather, right? So if you have, say, a leather tunic and you accent it with wool, and the wool is supporting parts of it and the leather is supporting other parts, what happens when you get wet? Well, the wool is going to contract because that's what wool does when it gets wet, and the leather is not. And so, in fact, the leather tends to harden a little bit if it gets wet. And as such, then the garment is going to literally tear itself apart. And so, while some people think it's a stupid law, it's a very practical one for the time. All right, here we get to some of the controversial stuff here. If a man sleeps with a female slave who is promised to another man, but who has not been ransomed or given her freedom, there must be due punishment. Yet they are not to be put to death because she has not been freed. The man, however, must bring a ram to the entrance of the tent of meeting for a guilt offering to the Lord. With the ram of the guilt offering, the priest is to make atonement for him before the Lord for the sin he has committed, and his sin will be forgiven. So some people think, wow, that's kind of jacked up. However, notice she is not, and because it says he has to bring all this stuff for to be forgiven, she doesn't. Why? Because of the power dynamic in place here. If a man is having sex with a female slave, that means that it is entirely on him, not on her. And so he is the one that must have atonement, not her. And so it's actually not nearly as bad as some people make that out to be. When you enter the land and plant any kind of fruit tree, regard its fruit as forbidden. For 3 years you are to consider it forbidden. It must not be eaten. In the fourth year, all its fruit will be holy, set apart, an offering of praise to the Lord. But in the fifth year you may eat its fruit. In this way your harvest will be increased. I am the Lord your God. And again, this is another one that if you're into agriculture, you would understand. It makes perfect sense. When you plant a tree, particularly the kind of trees that would grow in that region, which would be mostly fig trees, if you let it grow for a few years before you partake of its fruit, that fruit will be much healthier. As opposed to eating first year fruits off of a tree, not particularly good. And then you make a sacrifice to God, and this is one of the places where we get that concept of first fruits. Your first fruits always belong to God. That is symbolic. It's not a moral imperative that you sacrifice your first edibles harvest to God. But the idea there is that everything you have belongs to God, and so you should be thinking of God first. Do not eat any meat with the blood still in it. We've talked about this before, but this is primarily another health issue. But it is one that is reinforced in the New Testament, and so it's something that to this day you should not do. Because it's a health issue at the time, but it's also a symbolic issue because of the upcoming blood of Christ that we've spilt. Blood is to be considered sacred, and so it is not a snack. Sorry, blood pudding fans. Do not practice divination or seek omens. And that's something that, again, a lot of Christians do. Oh God, please just give me a sign, right? That's you're looking for an omen that something is true. If God has a message for you, He will send it to you. You simply need to pray that you are aware of God's intent in your life, not that, hey, God, send me three crows flying southwestwardly to tell me that, this is okay or something. Do not cut the hair at the sides of your head or clip off the edges of your beard. You'll notice this is exactly why Orthodox Jews look the way that they do, and some Orthodox Christians as well. If you are to take this law to the modern day, then you notice that most Orthodox Jews have a full beard and these curly locks that come off the side of their head. That's because of this particular law. However, the thing is that they also go through a lot of trouble to curl it and make it look just so. They're doing it for show at that point, which means it's not the idea was going back to the holiness part, that is to remind you of God's holiness and that we are to be holy. But instead, we've turned it into a self righteousness thing where we're showing off to other people, look how holy I am. Do not cut your bodies for the dead or put tattoo marks on yourselves. I am the Lord. Okay, here's a controversial one. And like you see people like me, I got like plenty of tattoos, right? And I plan on getting more if I can ever afford to. But the problem is, again, is that taking it into the proper historical and cultural context here, and it's even hinted at right here in this particular verse. Notice the words "for the dead," right? And this is a singular sentence where it's saying, and remember about word order in Hebrew. Word order is not all that irrelevant or all that relevant in a sentence. So the sentence, do not cut your bodies for the dead or put tattoo marks on yourselves, could just as easily be, do not cut your bodies or put tattoo marks on yourselves for the dead. And the reason for this is because it was a common pagan practice in the ancient Middle East for cultures, particularly the Canaanites, to do exactly that. If somebody died, it was very common to ritually cut themselves and to tattoo themselves, sometimes in honor of the dead and sometimes to protect themselves from the spirits of the dead. So, in this particular instance, that is absolutely forbidden. It has nothing to do with modern decorative tattoos. Now, if you feel a conviction about not getting a tattoo because of this particular verse, then don't get a tattoo, right? If you don't feel that conviction, like I obviously don't, then you are free to get a tattoo. However, I'm not going to try to convince someone who has a conviction against it to go get a tattoo because that would be putting a stumbling block in front of my brother. And if they rebuke me because I have tattoos, I would graciously accept that rebuke and without trying to argue with them, because I would speak the truth, but I would not be argumentative about it. Do not degrade your daughter by making her a prostitute, or the land will turn to prostitution and be filled with wickedness. Well, there you go. I know that the Bible is all sexist and everything, but it's actually, uh, let's see, just a second. Online. But yeah, you're not allowed to sell your daughter into prostitution. I know. Terrible how sexist the Bible is. Do observe my Sabbaths and have reverence for my sanctuary. I am the Lord. Now, again, Sabbath and Christ tries to make this clear to the Pharisees, but a lot of even Christians, particularly people like the Seventh Day Adventists and stuff, don't get it. The Sabbath is not about a specific day of the week necessarily. Yes, traditionally the Sabbath is Saturday. But guess what? Some of us have to work on Saturday. And it is not a sin to work on the Sabbath. If it were, then every week all the goats and the sheep and everything would simply have escaped from the nation of Israel because nobody was tending them. And so so you had people out in the fields all day on the Sabbath, even though modern Jews like to pretend that on the Sabbath you do nothing, right? You don't even get in a car because for some reason that's work, but walking isn't. I don't get that, but whatever. But that's one of the reasons Christ said that the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. And the idea there is that the Sabbath is meant to be a day of rest. Now, if if Saturday is your Sabbath, great, knock yourself out. If Sunday is your Sabbath, great, knock yourself out. And by the way, the Sabbath doesn't necessarily have to be the day you go to church, right? Which I know some people also will argue with. The Sabbath is that you are to work 6 days a week and rest one day a week. Now, if you work on Sunday after church, or you work on Saturday before church, or any other combination thereof, then you take a Sabbath day a different day of the week. Now, you should be thankful to God for that rest, and you should be reverent of God. And of course, when he talks about have reverence for the sanctuary, that is having reverence for your place of worship. But at the same time, that does not mean that if you don't show up on church on Saturday and you don't spend the entirety of Saturday fasting and praying, that somehow you are an evil, wicked person, you are misunderstanding the Sabbath, as Christ pointed out to the Pharisees. And so the Sabbath is not meant to be a day of suffering for the Lord. The Sabbath is supposed to be a day of joyful rest. Do not turn to mediums and seek out spiritists, for you will be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. In other words, don't consult with the dead. And this is one that a lot of people, again, they think it's cool, And there's actually an example of King Saul actually does do this. We'll see when we get to that particular book. But it is not okay to do that. Now, there are various arguments about why you don't do that. Now, one of the most common is that the idea that ghosts are not really a thing. The word spirit is commonly translated sometimes to ghost in some case. But ghosts, as in human beings who have died and are wandering the earth because they have unfinished business or some other reason, that's not a biblical idea. That's a rather demonic idea, and an idea that's very popular in cinema, but it is not a biblical idea. And so, generally speaking, if you are consulting with what you think is your dead Aunt Gladys, guess what? You just might be consulting with a demon who's pretending to be your dead Aunt Gladys. So it's best to completely stay away from that. Now, does that mean it's impossible to contact the dead? Well, based on what we see with Saul, when we get to it, we'll talk about it in detail. But it seems like Saul genuinely was able to contact the dead. However, that would be an exception rather than the rule. And keep in mind that the dead, according to most common belief of Jewish lore, up until the time of the resurrection, are in a holding area, if you will, called Sheol, where they live in spiritual form. And so God can do whatever he wants. So if God allows you to contact someone in Sheol, then that could well be what happened. That being said, it's still a violation of that commandment and would still have consequences for doing so. Stand up in the presence of the aged, show respect for the elderly, and revere your God. I am the Lord. Notice what it says here in this order. Stand up in the presence of the aged, meaning that now that's a sign of respect, particularly in their culture. Is that if somebody, it's funny because like you see it in some old timey movies where if a woman walks into the room, all the men immediately stand. That is a sign of reverence for that woman. And likewise, if an elder walks into the room, as a sign of respect, you should stand before them. But most people don't, not anymore. Most people just be sitting there going, "Hey, how's it going, Grandpa?" But what you should be doing is and part of that is because when Grandpa comes in, he is elderly, and you stand, that allows Grandpa to take any seat he wants because everybody is standing. But we are to show respect for our elders, and then it follows that would revere your God. And you might say, wow, is it comparing old people to God? In a very real sense, yes. The idea is that God is better represented in the elderly than in the young because the elderly have that life experience and education that the young lack. And so, assuming a godly elderly person, you should absolutely revere them, but then even more, you revere God Himself. Almost done. When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. Wow, what a concept. Uh, you know, Thinking about modern politics. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Now, does this mean that we should have open borders and just let all the illegals in? No. But it does mean they should be treated with dignity and as human beings, not like cattle. which unfortunately is what happens. And I think it's disgusting the way that we treat them, even though I do believe that we should, enforce the law. And so, but I think we should enforce the law humanely. Do not use dishonest standards when measuring length, width, or quantity. In other words, don't rip people off. Use honest scales and honest weights, an honest ephah and an honest hin. Those are units of measurement. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. So remember that if you're making a deal and you say, hey, I'll give me $10 and I'll give you 50 pounds of hay. It means you do not give them 49 and a half pounds. You don't give them 48 pounds. You give them 50 pounds or more. You do not ever, shortchange anybody. Likewise, if somebody, if the price is 50 and they accidentally give you 55, you don't keep that extra 5. You give it back to them. Right? So we need to be very careful about this because this is another thing that as Christians we tend to be dishonest about a lot. Like you walk out of the grocery store and you look at your bags, you realize, oh crap, I didn't pay for this. Most people's reaction is, well, sucks to be them. But the Christian response to that would be to immediately go back into the store, explain that you didn't pay for something, and then pay for it. Now, sometimes, in fact, most of the time in my case, in the cases where it's happened with me, is you go back into the store and you say, hey, you know what? Like say with self-scan or something, I forgot to scan this candy bar, and so I wanted to pay for it. And if the clerk says, don't worry about it, right? And the first I said, "Are you sure? I'm perfectly willing to pay for this candy bar." And if then they insist, "No," okay, well then it's a gift, even though they may not have been, properly authorized to give that gift. But the representative of the store said it's a gift. It's a gift. But until that happens, you need to pay for that. And then finally, keep all my decrees. This is the second time he says this, and all my laws, and follow them. I am the Lord. So, yeah, keep the law, guys. It's important. So, that is the general law of Leviticus chapter 19. And unlike, like the funny thing about it is that when people pull one of these verses out of context, it sounds horrible. But honestly, when we look into it and reread it, it doesn't sound that radical or crazy. In fact, it sounds like the cornerstone of a very good and orderly society. Funny how that works. All right, so now I'm going to read a little bit of chat, but the wife just got home, so I'm not going to read forever. All right, so what are you doing, Pringle? No, they're not in yet. Just relax. All right. Let's see. Let's see. Trustin said, I already read that, didn't I? Good evening to everybody. I already read that. Where am I? No. Tried to get to where I was. All right, so I think this is about where we are. God being evil in the Old Testament is disproven in many parts of the Bible, though God is not disproven to be evil here in Leviticus. In verses 9-10, it's clear this is an act of kindness. He's always good. 9 and 10 being the welfare stuff that we talked about gleaning your field. I think that a lot, the whole thing about the God of the Old Testament is this mean, evil, wrathful God comes from people that only read snippets of the Old Testament out of context. Is there wrathful moments in the Old Testament? Absolutely. But you know what the most wrathful book in the Bible is? That would be Revelation, not anything in the Old Testament, certainly not Leviticus. So I think that in order to come to the conclusion that, like when you look at Richard Dawkins, who says that the God of the Old Testament is like this appalling monster, and he describes him with all the worst possible characteristics he could think of, he's taking pretty much all of that out of context with the rest of the Old Testament. Whenever God displays his wrath in the Old Testament, it is truly justified. And it's not because he wants to hurt people or because he hates humanity or anything like that, but that God is just. And as a just God, he cannot let evil go unpunished. And a lot of people forget that. Josiah says the Orthodox Church church ways start with the priest. Blessed it is the kingdom of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and forever, ages and ages. Okay, not sure what your point there is, other than that that's how your service starts, which is fine. Just leave your scraps for them. Well, it's kind of here's the thing: is that if you own a farm and, like, let's say it's a 100-acre farm, and you leave the outermost 10, 15 feet of it unharvested, that's a lot of food that will feed a lot of poor people. Now, those poor people still got to get up off their butts and collect the food themselves, which is part of the reason in the New Testament it says that the person who's not willing to work shall not eat. Because even if you are poor, you can get off your lazy butt and go glean some food from the fields. Now, at the same time, the only people that there's an exception to there is those that are physically disabled, those that are incapable of taking care of themselves. It is the responsibility of the church to provide for them, which is another thing we fail miserably at. I hate the fact that my upcoming education is not coming from our church, but coming from the state. Let's see. I was thinking about the leave your gleanings verse, and I was pondering if universal basic income is the same thing. No, I would say not, because leaving your gleanings is a voluntary act, as opposed to taxation is involuntary by nature. So I'm not saying, I know we argue about taxes sometimes around here. I'm not saying don't pay your taxes, obviously. But what I am saying is that laws like universal basic income, while they come from a place of compassion, to be sure, honestly, if the leave your gleanings, if you translated it into the modern society, it would be like if you truly gave a good percentage of your net income every year to the church, and that the church could use that to make sure that the poor are provided for, which is one thing that the church is supposed to do. The problem is that most people don't even tithe, let alone give extra. But if everybody did tithe, the churches would have, and also everybody went to church, the churches would have more than enough resources to end poverty tomorrow. Good thing homosexuality is not a sin in the Bible. Yeah, that's what the progressive Christians like to say, which is insane. Different in details, but maybe the same in morality. Not sure 100% what you mean there. Let's see. Do not hate a fellow Israelite in your heart. Rebuke your neighbor frankly so that you will not share in their guilt. Yes. Let's see. Does that mean to tell them to their face what's bothering you? It absolutely does. And so you should, don't, let's see, don't hold a grudge, just express your anger. It's not expressing your anger. Keep in mind, that's a very important thing to think about. Is that if you are angry and you're yelling at someone, that's not the same as, let's say somebody cut you off. So your initial response is you're angry. Then, and you know who the person is. Then later on, you find that person, you say, hey, you know what? I just want to let you know that you cut me off in traffic, and I think that was inappropriate for you to do that. You don't say, man, that pissed me off. You let them know what they did wrong in a kind and loving way, not in an accusatory and angry manner. Josiah says, I had a girlfriend in the past, but I've kisses boys before and been kissed when I was in school. Okay, well, like again, that's a thing between you and your priest to talk about, not me. Go ahead and curse the deaf. He can't hear you anyway. Well, that's part of the reason that's in there. And then we already talked about that. Curse doesn't necessarily mean saying words. It's to wish harm upon others, really, is what a curse is. Do not degrade your daughter by making her a prostitute. A land will turn prostitution filled with wickedness. Yes, indeed. I meant homosexuality is not the worst sin in the Bible. Well, no, but it is a sin. And the thing is that homosexuality as a sin should not be discounted because, oh, it's not as bad as murder, and it should not be also overly emphasized as some conservative evangelicals do, where they act like homosexuality is the single worst sin ever. Instead, it should be treated as it is, a sin, something to be avoided, but something that Christ died for, like every other sin. And we get confused by going to one extreme or the other. We need to not be extremists in either case. Is it exactly the same as murder? No, but only in the fact that the consequences are different. And that's something else that people forget. Like, Christ died to forgive us for all of our sins, but he did not die to relieve us of all the consequence of our sins. So if we commit a crime and we get on our knees and pray to God for forgiveness, oh, he'll forgive us in a heartbeat. But that doesn't mean that we ain't going to jail. Were people actually turning out their daughters? Yes. It was actually, sadly, keep in mind, while the Bible itself is not sexist like many people make it out to be, the culture at the time certainly was. Women were treated as property, had no rights, etc. And it was not uncommon that, if a family needed money, that they would sell their daughters into prostitution because that was a way to make some money. Disgusting, but it did happen. Not sure about the specific order. As far as look, we need to stop worrying about what sin is worse than others because they're all to be avoided. That's the important thing. If Michael was a barbarian vigilante with superhuman strength, master of magic, a master of Sanda Jiu-Jitsu, judo, could he use the power of gods fought a psychotic crime lord with superhuman speed, master of alchemy? Who knows? I guess. Also, Michael has an IQ of 200, and the psychotic crime lord was high battle IQ and can outwit Michael pretty easily. Well, then that would be a problem for me, I suppose. I have a family member that had a weird animal that mixed between a dog and a cat. I do not believe there is such a thing as a mix between a dog and a cat. They are genetically incompatible. It might have been another, like, there are certain, like, some people compare, for example, finnick foxes to being cat dogs because they have very cat-like behavior and they have cat-like ears, but they are canines. Likewise, some people refer to certain breeds of cats as being cat dogs because of their puppy-like behavior and all that. But there, as far as I know, there is no such thing as an actual hybrid cat dog. And that's what I said about also Michael Train's young age heart. Look, I don't know about your fantasy thing here. I think it's kind of off. Early Christians got tattoos. Well, there was, the tattoo thing being ultra forbidden is really something that came about with the modern evangelical movement. What about tattooing and cutting for other purposes? It is not mentioned. And so although other decorative things are mentioned, and are certain, like, for example, there is nothing wrong with piercing and stuff like that. Where it becomes a problem, and this is actually addressed in the New Testament a little bit, is when it's done as a sign that you are somehow better than others. Then it becomes a massive issue. We live in a falling world. I assume you mean fall in which case, yes, that is true. Walking to work to the Orthodox Jew. Walking is work to the Orthodox Jew if you go more than 1.5 miles. Yeah, and that kind of thing is absolutely silly. The legalistic view on Sabbath, where, oh my gosh, if you work in any way, shape, or form, is ridiculous, as Christ himself points out, that if you have a lamb that gets stuck in a ditch and it's the Sabbath, aren't you going to go get that lamb? Or are you going to let it die? So people are pretty stupid when it comes to the work thing. It's not meant to be taken as a legal extreme, despite the fact that many do treat it that way. The car is forbidden because it requires lighting fire, which is forbidden under Sabbath verse. Gotcha. However, it doesn't light a fire. It has micro explosions, but, whatever, semantics. I would say this. It's still silly. Johnny Knoxville versus Krusty the Clown. Well, Krusty is a cartoon and therefore very difficult to harm, so I'll go with Krusty. Treat the foreigner well until they decide to stay, and then they're no longer foreigners. Well, there you go. That's that. There's the out. AKA be a man. I'm not sure which law you're referring to there. The store rep is a shrewd steward making friends for when they get fired. That you could argue that, but at the same time, on the one hand, if it is your duty as a customer to report, like if you accidentally get that candy bar in the bag, but it's also the store rep's duty to then correct the mistake and charge you for it. Because if they don't, they are violating the law about weights and measures and basically purposely ripping off the store as opposed to ripping you off. Cut off by that dang Uber driver again. Well, we're Uber drivers. I will say this, not meaning to throw my fellow Uber drivers under the bus, but most of them are horrible drivers. In the opening song of Lower Decks, when the Cerritos runs into a veritable pantheon of baddies, what in the world is the enormous snowflake? That would be the crystalline entity from TNG. How are you feeling? Did your ear clear up? Ear is doing much better. It's not 100% yet, but it is definitely tracking in the right direction. It was, last time I saw the doctor, he said the infection was cleared up, but it was still swollen a little bit. So he gave me some steroids to take over the next few days, and it seems to be doing much better now. Thank you. Mr. Bean versus Mr. Rogers. Now, that is a tough one because, on the one hand, Mr. Bean is nigh unbeatable because of his godlike ability to accidentally win in any kind of combat. However, Mr. Rogers is absolute purity incarnate. So, if Mr. Bean actually had a negative thought towards Mr. Rogers, he would spontaneously combust and die. So I would give that one to Mr. Rogers. The strongest version of the Hulk versus the strongest version of Solomon Grundy, born on a Monday. I don't know enough about Solomon Grundy to answer that. Because, like if you go to like something like World Breaker Hulk or something, you are talking about some very serious cosmic level strength there. As far as Solomon Grundy, I don't know how strong his strongest versions get. I know that in his weaker forms, he fights people like Batman, which isn't all that impressive. But in his stronger forms, he fights people like Superman, which is all that impressive. So, but I don't know exactly how tough his toughest form is. Josiah says Wendigo versus werewolf. I would probably have to go with Wendigo on that one because after the full moon ends, if they're both still standing, the werewolf turns back into man. When Solomon Grundy was at his strongest, he was able to beat Superman. Right, but World Breaker Hulk, and this is funny. One thing that the DC writers have actually conceded that Hulk is stronger than Superman, but they also think that Superman will win in a fight because Superman has more than just strength at his disposal. For example, Superman can fly, Hulk cannot, and Superman has heat vision, so he can literally keep hitting Hulk from a distance with extremely potent heat vision and try to wear him down that way. Wolfman versus Dracula. Definitely Dracula. Not only does Dracula have the superhuman strength and everything to match Wolfman in his physical abilities, but Dracula also has a host of other abilities making him nigh unbeatable, including, by the way, the ability to transform into a wolf. The strongest Grundy can spar with Superman. Sony artist said, who wins, Kool-Aid Man or Fat Albert? That would be a very interesting fight, except for one problem. Is that at first it would seem that they were equals because they're relatively equal in strength and size. However, Fat Albert eventually, as they fought, would get thirsty and just drink all the Kool-Aid out of Kool-Aid Man, and that would be the end of the fight. World Breaker Hulk would beat normal Superman, but there are extra powerful Superman versions too. Yeah, but I'm saying that the writers at DC have conceded that overall Hulk is simply stronger. Hulk is the strongest, but Superman is the most powerful. And so, there are other powers besides super strength. And yeah, and Superman has all the powers basically. All right, so with that, dude, I am going to wrap it up. I thank you guys for hanging out with me because, as always, it's an absolute honor to that you guys hang out with me on these streams, and I appreciate it more than words can say. As time goes on, I can't wait to tell you more about my wonderful education and how that goes and how stressed I am and all that. But in the meantime, take care, God bless, and I'm just glad that Darren Wagner didn't show up today.